wanted to know specifically, what was the straw that broke the camel's back here? Why did Quinn Hughes say to the Canucks, apparently over American Thanksgiving, yeah, I'm not going to sign here in 18 months?
Yeah, it was about 3 weeks ago was when that conversation happened. And, I don't know that there was one thing. I think it was the accumulation of a number of factors, starting with the fact the team isn't very good. I don't believe we're sitting here having this conversation, in an alternate universe where the Canucks got off to a great start this year. Everyone was happy. They're winning. It probably creates a different circumstance around Quinn Hughes to maybe think differently upon that. The media in Vancouver, I know, was something that started to weigh on him. Obviously, very demanding market. He's the captain of the team. He's not the one building out the roster, but you're kind of weighing things. And let's face it, even you can go back to last year, everything that happened with JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. I don't think that was an easy situation for anyone with kind of a leadership stake in that club trying to get them through that. So, my understanding really is it was just a combination of a lot of the factors that built up over time. And obviously every day that was passing, he was getting closer to July 1st, 2027, which is, when he'll become an unrestricted free agent, when he has the ultimate control that a player's got to spend a lot of years in the league to earn. And, he was not at all at a position where he was thinking about extending in Vancouver. And, I think, when you look at the return, it's hard to argue that this wasn't the best time to trade him because the closer and closer that deadline became, I think the Canucks would have lost leverage. And so, ultimately, I think everyone kind of comes away with the best case here. I mean, probably the best case would be the Canucks being competitive, but that wasn't the case. And as a result, here we are today.
What on earth is going on in Vancouver? Because for years, the Canucks have struck me as a team that should be better than they are. And one year they were, and I bought into that. And I was like, well, this is what they are now. They had that 7-game series against the Oilers. If they have Brock Besser, maybe it goes the other way. Who knows? We'll never know. But there was like a supposed rift between Horvat and some guys. Horvat's gone. There's a supposed rift between JT Miller and practically everyone. He's gone. Rick Tocchet said, I don't want to be a coach here anymore, leaves. And now Quinn Hughes, who a lot of Canucks fans refer to as the best defenseman they've ever had, the best player they've ever had, is gone. Like, I think they did really well with the package here, and we'll get into that. But what's going on?
It's a difficult question to answer. They've refused to do a rebuild. I think that's kind of, if you want to call it the original sin, is sort of just committing to a specific, plan of attack for building out the team. They don't have a practice rink, which is, sounds like a small thing, but when you look at the amenities that teams are building out around the league, they've kind of lagged behind in some of the things they can offer, players who play there. It's a very difficult market. It's not the only one in the league, but they have a lot of, coverage. They have, a lot of people in the marketplace, and I give them credit, who are not afraid to call a spade when it comes to certain situations. And so, with you add it together, it just seems like they're kind of piecemealing it. And, I don't know that it's one thing that you can say, like, this is what's going wrong there. But you sort of look at the totality of this and you're like, man, they've had a lot of good players pass through, even with the way things have gone. And honestly, it's not like the management's made exclusively bad decisions. They've made some pretty good trades, I think. It's just they haven't been able to collect it all together and make it work. And the JT Miller stuff last year, that's kind of like an earthquake on a team. I mean, you look 2 seasons ago, both he and Pettersson were 100-point players. Obviously, Quinn Hughes, one of the best defensemen in the world. Thatcher Demko is a top goaltender. I mean, they had the pieces lined up in place if they could have made that work, where you're like, you can build a winner out of that. Now, it was only going to last so long. Miller's getting up there, so you expect some decline as time goes along in his game. But, they did have it kind of arranged, and it's all fallen to pieces here. And, I think if there's one positive, quite honestly, is they did pretty well, in my view, in this trade for Quinn Hughes. It's never a good situation when you're trading Hughes, but they made a hard decision, because the truth of the matter was he wasn't staying, and you can sort of stick your neck in the sand and pretend that isn't happening, or you can get out there and, basically make the deal they did. And, I kind of wish we saw more of this around the league. I actually give them not credit for putting themselves in this situation, but, at least once they were in that situation, I think that they've actually done pretty well here.
At least they didn't lose it for nothing. Jess?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were jumping in. Okay, well.
4 pennies on the dollar. Like, they got good value here. This is 3 first-round players, all under the age of 25, and a first-round pick. I mean, that's a haul.
That could have been the Mitch Marner return. Now, I listen. I might be reading.
It could have been though. You're not like that's not just a joke. It could have been.
It could have been. It could have been had they made. Had they been decisive about it. The Toronto Maple Leafs. That is also.
Yeah, and if they had done it 18 months before he was a free agent instead of in the last year when he already had the no move clause.
Exactly.
Get out of my head.
Quinn didn't have any trade protection, right? As a part of this
deal? Not.
No. So that was also a smart call by the Canucks management. Now, I have seen Canucks fans, and I think they have a point, say the biggest mistake the Canucks made was picking JT Miller over Bo Horvat, which has cascaded, and you couldn't have seen it when the trade happened, but has cascaded into the scenario we're in right now because it was, from what I understand, Bo Horvat and JT Miller not getting along. They chose JT Miller.
Well, you know what version of Bo is showing up to the rink every day.
And Bo Horvat, I believe he's hurt right now, or was briefly hurt, but he was an outside contender for Team Canada.
Mm-hmm.
CJ, do you think this is a sliding doors sort of moment for the Canucks? Had they chosen differently with Bo Horvat? Are we in a different scenario today?
We have the massive benefit of hindsight, but I think it's fair to say that. I don't remember if I thought that at the time, quite honestly, but looking back, you can definitely say it. And, just as a small point of correction, I think Bo Horvat's on the inside for Team Canada right now. I mean, we'll see where he's at health-wise, but I think he's very much in the mix to make the team. Obviously probably he's a 13th or 14th forward, but that's how good his season has been, is that he's right there. The Islanders have been a better team, I think, than a lot of us expected. Some of that's on Matthew Schaefer being generationally good to start his career, but it's also players like Horvat, taking a step forward. So, there is probably that alternate universe where that could have changed some things. I mean, no one was saying that when, I can't remember that year what Miller had, but he had over 100 points. I remember, like, no one was probably saying that right in the immediate aftermath of the trade when that happened. But, over time, that looks to be, a fission point. It's hard, man. It's like, at the end of the day, it really is difficult to build a good team. I'm not letting the Canucks off the hook here, but, I do feel like they, that's probably where it's more frustrating in a sense. They haven't been like laughably bad at any point, right? No. It's more like, it's not like they're not in Sabres territory here, in terms of just an inability to like get even anywhere off the runway, but they've still had trouble keeping the plane together. And, I think if Horvat was there, we're probably talking about a different scenario. Who knows? Like, you start playing that game, it's like, well, maybe Hughes never leaves. Like, there's a lot of what ifs, right, about all this stuff. They let Chris Tanev walk years ago. I know Tanev was a player that Quinn Hughes was very fond of.
You can see why, by the way.
Yeah, but you can also see that. I mean, the problem is he went for 4 years to Calgary, with the tail end of it being in Dallas, and he held up tremendously under that contract that the Canucks were wary to give him. But now, look where he is in Toronto. He had a great year last year, so that'd be the 5th year since leaving Vancouver. But now he's unfortunately been hurt most of the season. I think that durability was always just a concern, frankly, because of the way he throws his body in front of pucks and puts his body on the line so consistently. So, I do think it's a series of things that lead to today. It's almost like death by 1,000 cuts, that lead to the point where you're trading Quinn Hughes at age 26. And, I think the Canucks will be fascinating. Their side of this, how they proceed. I mean, they might, who knows? They might luck into a number 1 overall pick this year. I mean, that's one thing they've sort of not gone down that road, but, even with a win in New Jersey, they're still right near the bottom of the standings and are likely, I think, headed to favorable lottery territory. And, they could end up sort of bouncing back quicker than we think if they get a great player in this year's draft.
Now, Jesse and I made a video like right after the trade happened. And I was reached out to by a few friends of mine who are Canucks fans, but they're not necessarily dialed into the prospect system of the Minnesota Wild. they were
Right.
they were mourning the loss of Quinn Hughes to another Western Conference team, but I started getting messages like, is this Zeev Buium kid actually that good? And sure enough, he has 2 points in his debut. What can you say about like how Zeev Buium's looked at league wide?
Well, very favorably. I mean, I would never come here and say he's going to have Quinn Hughes' career, because Quinn Hughes won a Norris Trophy and is probably on most people's top 2 or top 3 lists right now. And so I don't know if his ceiling gets quite that high, but certainly a number 1 defenseman on your team type of potential. And he's been a winner too. I mean, that's the other side of this. He's done a lot of winning with USA Hockey to this point, really at every age level, including the World Championship last year. And, I think there's still development, and it's going to take a little bit of time because he's so recently drafted. But, that's the win here. If you're Vancouver, is getting a prospect with that kind of potential that he could become potentially somewhere near what Quinn Hughes was. Plus you get the center that they've badly needed. I mean, discussions with the Wylde on Marco Rossi go way back, several months ago. The Canucks were originally trying to get him. Liam Ogren, I think, is a little bit more of a modest prospect, but, an NHL player who's still very young. And then you get the first round pick. I mean, I think getting that kind of return, each of those pieces is meaningful, right? Like there's no fodder just thrown in there to make it look like, hey, we got a bunch of magic beans here. Marco Rossi had 60 points last year. I know he's maybe a little smaller than some people like in terms of, being a frontline center in the league. But if you get to a point perhaps where he's your number 2, and he might be there when Elias Pettersson's healthy for the Canucks. I mean, that's a pretty good asset in and of itself. We're talking about all these teams around the league looking for centermen. The Canucks just got one, plus a prospect that could become Hughes. So, that probably doesn't fill you with joy if you're a Canucks fan who, probably bought a 43 jersey and, spent the last number of years believing that Quinn Hughes was going to take your team and your organization to levels it hasn't been to. But, I think under the circumstances, it really is as good as they could have done. And with Buium in particular, I mean, he was a top draft prospect, and I don't think they've seen any decline in his game. It's just, there's a learning curve typically for defensemen entering the league. I mean, Schaefer's, who I mentioned earlier, might be the one guy that seems to be defying that. But if you look at pretty much any player, entering the league at 19 or 20 as a defenseman, it usually takes a couple of years to start, bending the game to your will.
Yeah, I think most rational Canucks fans look at that trade like how you described it, and that like, oh, this is pretty good for Quinn Hughes. We kind of got everything we wanted. But I think the majority of Canucks fans, and I agree with them, look at it as we reached a point in our franchise's tenure where we had to trade our captain, and we had to trade the best player in this trade, and we had to lose one of the best defensemen in the league, and that in and of itself is a problem. And for me, that comes down to ownership and Francesco Aquilini. So I don't know if you have any insight into how he's perceived amongst the other people within the game, and if he's messing too much with the franchise. His fingers are a little too much on the Canucks, because we know he's very involved. But if I'm a Canucks fan today or on Friday, like that's who I kind of am looking at for the reason as to why we reached that point. We might have won the trade, or at least come out looking good in the trade, but we should have never reached the point where we had to make the trade at all.
Well, ironically, I can tell you that Quinn Hughes thinks highly of Francesco Aquilini, and not just because he thanked him when he did his press avail in Minnesota. I mean, I think there was a real good relationship there. So it hasn't got to the level where necessarily players share this, but I understand why the media have zoned in on him in particular, and the fans, because there's a common denominator here, right? He's owned the team for quite some time, and basically this entire period, going back 10 years of decisions. I mean, really since Mike Gillis was the GM of this team, the Canucks have veered in all sorts of wild directions under, his tutelage or time as the owner. And so, ultimately the buck stops with him, right? And his family, but he's kind of the front facing member of his family that runs the team. And so, he's not universally thought of the way you might see him characterized by fans or the media within the sport, including with Quinn Hughes. And I think there's a lot of appreciation with the way the Canucks actually handled this exit. There's a lot of relief too right now for Quinn Hughes. You could see it. I mean, you watched the way he looked in Minnesota. I mean, that guy looked like he had 1,000-pound weight lifted off his shoulder. Just I think getting that fresh start, having it not drag on even longer. I mean, this might be the worst thing that could happen if you're a Canadian before the Olympics is Quinn Hughes, getting that sort of weight and burden off himself, getting a chance to be re-energized, playing now in Minnesota for the next, 5-6 weeks ahead of that Olympic tournament with, a few players that are going to be part of, including Faber and Boldy, that are going to be part of his teammates in Milan. So, I think that the reviews are mixed on Aquilini, depending on who you're talking to, but certainly doesn't give the impression of an owner that, look, in a market like Vancouver, there's just so many opinions. Like he doesn't give you the impression he fully gets, where the criticism's coming from, right? I mean, there's like a disconnect there. It feels like between the message that he feels he's sending but what the media and the fans are hearing. I don't know how you solve that fact. As I say, like what makes the Canucks hard to break down for me is it has not been universally good or bad. Like I feel like it's a real mixed bag of things. And then yet we're sitting here talking about them trading a recent Norris Trophy winner at age 26. I mean, there's no good way to put a spin on that. I mean, unless you're trading that for like, another superstar player in real time, and it's a true star for star trade. Which is not. I mean, there's some hope built into this that the prospects and young players are going to, help them collectively. But I mean, now I'm looking at Minnesota, quite honestly, guys, as a team that has its cup window open. I think it's that significant of addition for them. I'm aware of, what your follow-up is probably going to be if we talk about the Wylde end of this about, their center depth not being, typically what we see with a cup contender. But I mean, you win Stanley Cups because of players like Quinn Hughes. Like there's not a lot of players like him in the league that are true difference makers. I mean, it might be 10 or so. It would be my just rough estimation. So the fact that they've got two now in Kaprizov and him is pretty special for the Wylde.
So I've got a couple of conspiracy theory questions because I think it's always good to ask these, especially with somebody as well connected as you are, CJ. But I will tell you, part of the message, I think, just to comment on what you said there, part of the message that I think is not getting through to Canucks fans is something you referenced right off the top of this segment. And Steve and Jesse and I, when we were at Sport Check in the playoffs, were talking about the fact that Canucks do not have a practice facility. Francesco Aquilini's business, the way that he makes money, which is not the Vancouver Canucks, most of these billionaires are using them as tax write-offs. He makes money by developing real estate. There's absolutely no excuse that a guy that plugged in to British Columbia real estate can't figure this out. It seems as though that is one factor as a part of many that has led to the scenario that we're in, right? Like it's not the whole story, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, well, it's nice that he's a nice guy and it's nice that he handled Quinn Hughes well, but this is a fumble of epic proportions, and I think Canucks fans were right to point that out, and it didn't have to be this way. Now, the question I have for you, there's two, but the first conspiracy theory question I have for you is Quinn Hughes notably did not thank Patrick Allvin in the Instagram post, did not thank Patrick Allvin, as far as I could see, in the press conference. When he says thanks to Jim Rutherford, does he mean Jim Rutherford and his administration, or is there some tension there?
I'm not aware of any tension specifically, but I think in this case, the reason he's thanking Jim Rutherford is because he handled the trade. Okay. Right? He took the reins on, dealing with Pat Brisson and Quinn's agents at CAA, keeping the Hughes camp informed of where things were going, giving Pat Brisson the ability to speak to the GMs, above board about that were involved here trying to make the trade. And so, I think it is more a reflection on the fact that Jim Rutherford basically ran the show here from the Canucks end of this deal, and that Quinn and his family were very appreciative of how he conducted himself during that. I mean, Jim Rutherford has a sterling reputation inside the NHL as being, I realize he might take some arrows for decisions the Canucks are making in that market, but in terms of how he conducts business, he's widely respected, very straight to the point, gets a deal like this done, right? Doesn't drag this out for 6 weeks, because really this trade came together in days. And that's not always the way things go.
No. Thank goodness, and I think, honestly.
Yeah,
let's go. But it came movement. Hell yeah.
Yeah. But honestly, like the thing is some people aren't that decisive in the league, right? And some people like to just kick tires and have all these calls and drag it. Like you can imagine yourself. I mean, if you've ever dealt with I don't know, made a fantasy hockey or fantasy football trade. Like, it's nice when you can just get down to business and two people sit down and talk openly and get it done. So, I don't read into that as much as you might. There could be something there, but honestly, Adam, I've never heard any whiff of that in conversation. So, I can't really. I think it's just more. It just highlights that titles don't matter.
Yeah,
because Patrick Allvin's the GM, but let's face it, Jim Rutherford is the top decision maker in the hockey operations department, and he conducted the trade essentially.
Okay, I guess my other. And I've talked to a few people. There's questions about Jim, but this is not my other question. Questions about, he's 77. CJ, do you think he's still going to be running this team next year?
I do. Okay. Lou Lamoriello just ran the Islanders until into his 80s, right?
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if he wasn't. I think that he's still game for it. And, I think that at the ownership level, he's in good standing. So, I mean, I guess there's a world, like, let's just hope he's healthy enough and all those things. I mean, you don't want to take anything for granted, but I do think he'll be back.
Now, I my other conspiracy theory, and this is the real one, is you mentioned the Minnesota Wild center depth and how it's potentially lacking, especially with a 60-point center like Marco Rossi gone. We saw Pittsburgh blow two historic crazy leads this weekend. They are falling back to earth. And I know Penguins fans are going to hate it, specifically coming from me because I've been so hard on them the last couple of years. But I have to ask the question. Marc-Andre Fleury still connected to the organization. Bill Guerin, Crosby's former teammate, running the organization. If Sidney Crosby becomes available, do the Minnesota Wild become a factor?
Well, say it this way. I mean, it's still a monster if Sidney Crosby becomes available to anyone. But all the teams that would like to have him can really do is put themselves in a position where if that day comes, that they can be a spot where it would make sense for him to consider going. And I think that just on the surface, you now see in Minnesota the conditions where it might make sense. I mean, he would step in as their number one center, in my view, and would be on their top power play and still be joining a team that I think can be considered a credible cup contender, a place where he might be comfortable given the relationship he has, and given that he could, basically go try to help a team do something it hasn't done. I mean, to me, the Minnesota Wild in their entire history have never been more relevant than they are today. By the moves that they've made in the last few months. I know that they made those monster signings back in 2012, getting Ryan Suter and Zach Parise both at the time when they were two of the top free agents. That was maybe close, but that experiment didn't pan out. I think when you look at how elite their goaltending's been this year, having Kaprizov signed, now having Quinn Hughes in place with Faber, with guys like Boldy, Eriksson Ek. I mean, all these players are locked up too, right? They don't have the kind of question marks sometimes a team has where you're like, ooh, is this guy going to extend in a year? And what's the number going to be? And is that going to blow the cap situation? I mean, they're in total go mode right now. So I think that they at least present the things that would make it make sense. But at this point, that's not in Sidney Crosby's mind. I mean, I don't think he's looking around the league, wondering where he might go. But, the Montreal Canadiens, it's no secret, have been hoping to be in that position. Their season hasn't gone as well as they would have liked to this point. So I don't know if they'd still be in that mix. But I think all the teams that hope to get him can do is just be ready to act. The biggest issue, what I see in Minnesota, honestly, and we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. I know I'm going to.
That was the point. That was the point.
I'm going to radio the hell out of myself with these answers.
Go, CJ.
No, but someone's just going to clip part of what I said and not give the full context.
Good. That's good for us.
Okay. Bad for me, good for you.
Yes, exactly.
But the Wild might not have the trade pieces to make sense still. Like that is actually the only part of the equation, if we're just fantasy GMing this from 10,000 feet, that I don't know if it could fit together, because they've obviously depleted their young player prospect draft pick pool significantly in the Hughes deal. And those are the kind of assets, if it ever got to the point that Pittsburgh would be looking for, just as they've been looking for in all their trades, frankly, for the last year or two. The Penguins have been actively trying to get younger. So, what remains unchanged is Sidney Crosby will drive the bus on what does or doesn't happen with this. They're still in a playoff spot, I believe, at this point in time. So there's no way he's thinking the way we are, but it's our job to get ahead of ourselves, or to do this sort of idle speculation at times. And so I think if we had done the list in the summer, like where are the places that could make sense, Minnesota wouldn't have been there for me. Now Minnesota would be on that list.
Okay, so that was good. Let's try that again. Can you just say Danila Yurov, David Juracek, and 2 firsts, and then we'll edit that back like a few moments into the clip.
We'll make it it'll be a sensation on TikTok.
Yeah. Is that all right? Is that okay?
I know CJ hates this so much.
You know what? I'm just, anyway, you got AI at this point. I mean, I'm sure you can just somehow make it happen. Like, you twist my words any way you want with the computer help. So,
you know what? He's right. He's right. Sorry, that was a good
conversation.
idea.
The conversation is fun for everyone but Penguins fans. But,
yes.
I think that we all have wondered what it could look like. Look at what's the excitement over the weekend. It's seeing like a player like Quinn Hughes, which is not exciting for Canucks fans, I realize, but switch jerseys, play a game. Like, it's kind of weird to see him in the green, but then you see him make a few big plays, and like look how electric that building was in Minnesota on Sunday. Like it was, and quite honestly, as I said, like, that team has a level of relevance they have never had, in my opinion, because of a trade like this, because of the Kaprizov signing. Like they truly are all in, like the way that I think fans of any organization would love to see their GM operating, taking some calculated risks, all those things. I mean, this adds juice to the league. It's exciting. And I understand the legacy component in Pittsburgh. And I understand, frankly, the Penguins have been trying to get to the point where they're, on the upswing again before the end of Crosby's career. And even a guy like Malkin, right? He's had a pretty good year. I know it's his last year of his contract, but they're due to sit down in 6 weeks or so time and see maybe if an extension's in place. I mean, maybe they'll keep it together in Pittsburgh. Like that's obviously what they're trying to do from an organizational standpoint. But, Pat Brisson, who's Crosby's agent, was public in preseason, right? About he feels like Sid should be in the playoffs every year. And, he still remains at a high level despite his age. And is he willing to let another season go down the drain? If the Penguins, go into the Olympic break out of a playoff spot and kind of trending in the wrong direction, could there be a change of heart there? I don't know. I know Crosby doesn't want this talked about publicly, but you have to think, if you're him, like, can you miss the playoffs again? It's just hard to imagine, given how productive he remains and how good he still is.
Let's bug him after the Olympics, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah. No, I don't want him being distracted.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Let's bug him after.